Okay, so welcome to tonight's panel discussion, transitioning to full stack and beyond, broadening your tech horizons. My name is Chris, and I'm a software engineer and one of the community organizers of Tech Tank. And I'm super excited to be moderating this event tonight and being able to chat with our panelists this evening. Unfortunately, one of our panelists, Chelsea, she was unable to join us tonight as she's under the weather. So we're all wishing her a speedy recovery. However, we're so honored to have Davidson and Chitra here tonight who are eager to share their insights with you. I'm sure most of the new folks here tonight have found us through our meetup page, but if you're not familiar with us, Tech Tank is an active group of tech enthusiasts that range from junior and early career professionals all the way to seniors with over 10 years of experience. And we host job-related workshops and sessions like these, as well as study groups and in-person networking and social meetups in Toronto. So if you're interested in joining, we do have a Slack group, and we'll plug in the link now and also again at the very end. And at the end of our panel discussion, you'll have a chance to ask questions to the panelists through chat or by unmuting your mic. And after that, we can make some time to do some casual networking depending on how much time we have left over. At this time, we're going to post a Google Sheet where you can share your LinkedIn so everybody can connect with one another. I know we're not together in person, but this way you'll be able to meet the other people who have joined in here. And I am sure by now you're probably dying to hear from the panelists themselves. So without further ado, let's bring them up. Hello, hello. Hello, hello. So introducing Davidson and Chitra to everybody here. So we're no kind of formal format or anything. We'll just kind of go around. Whoever wants to start first kind of thing. So why don't we just start with a brief intro and, can you briefly introduce yourselves, maybe what you do, share your journey of how you came to be and, how you identify now as a full stack developer or beyond?
I guess I'm off mute, so I'll go first, Davidson. So hi, everyone. My name is Chitra. I actually fell into this career by accident. I say that by accident because I spent 6 years of my career or 6 years of my working life in US immigration law and with a degree in political science. And it was a unexpected move to Canada that led me to, deciding if I wanted to stay in that or switch to something else. I saw that the tech culture was booming here at the time. This is back in 2018, 2019. And at that point, I decided to just walk into a boot camp just to see what was going on and what I could possibly learn. A couple of guys there just got together and somehow convinced me that I was not making the biggest mistake of my life. And 9 weeks later, I walked out of that boot camp. I don't think I learned anything, or at least I don't think I learned anything. But somehow, surprisingly, 3 months later, I convinced somebody to give me an internship. I'm saying all this, but honestly, it was a lot of luck and I guess perseverance. But I was able to get an internship at a consultancy with a Canadian subsidiary of a US consultancy, where I got to basically first day on the job learn how to make into CI/CD pipeline, which I had no idea about. Again, the boot camp was really a front-end boot camp, HTML, CSS, JavaScript. And I give that as an example because that was a crucial step to becoming a full stack and accidentally landing into a full stack journey from having started in an accidental front-end journey. And that led me to another 2 years at IBM, where I got to continue working in that. And I'm back at that consultancy company now, and I'm continuing my journey, and that's where I'm at right now. Thank you.
Thanks. All right, guess I'll go next. So hey everyone, my name is Davidson. I'm currently working as a senior full stack engineer at a company called Ada Support in Canada, which is all about customer service and chatbots and that kind of stuff. Started my career actually in the banking industry. So studied business, got my bachelor's in commerce in university. I was super ambitious and I really wanted to get a head start in my career. I was really just going crazy with it. So, I did some part-time work in university, ended up getting to a mortgage specialist kind of role, but realized after 3 months into it, I just had an epiphany, wake up moment of what am I doing with my life? I hate banking. I don't like what I'm studying. This is crazy. So I ended up quitting my job after 3 months in around 2017. And then Had sort of like a soul searching mode of deciding what I wanted to do with my life. Briefly considered being a rapper at one point, which is hilarious, and I'm so glad I didn't do that because I would have completely just destroyed my career. But ended up actually looking online and seeing that the tech industry, like Chitra said, was booming. So I did some programming on the side. If any of you guys know, or if you folks know a game called Path of Exile, I used to play that a lot, and I built my own like internal tools to like look at items being sold in that game to find stuff and snipe good deals. So that's my intro to programming, and then fast forward like a year, I was doing like Shopify websites for local businesses, mostly front end stuff. And after taking like a small course at like a boot camp, not a full boot camp, but like a boot camp provider, they had a full stack course. Ended up getting my first full stack gig, leveraging my backend skills in those PoE tools plus the front end experience I had from Shopify, and then from there things just sort of developed really quick, and how I got to where I am today. So yeah, that's it for me.
Wow, what an introduction from both of you. I am so intrigued about this potential rapper life. I don't know, maybe we can find something on YouTube somewhere if we dig really hard. Yeah, so that's very, very interesting. And Chitra, I love what you said about like how you accidentally fell into it. And I love the way that you put it. Sometimes I feel, I feel kind of the same way, but at the same time, it's accidental, but I think it was at the same time probably meant to be. Um, and we're all here today. So yeah, thank you so much for that very entertaining introduction from both of you. So let's get straight into it. Let's talk about, people are here. Most likely, I would say a lot of folks might be here because they're currently front end developers, including myself, actually, or maybe they're back end, but they want to kind of integrate, bring the two together, or kind of see where else they can go with their career. So let's talk about what is full stack. So in your own words, what do you think defines a full stack developer, and why do you think this role might be kind of pivotal in today's tech landscape? So maybe give us some of the core skills and responsibilities, and if you find that some of those skills are kind of essential within the industry right now.
Sure. David, I see that you're again on mute. So I think it's the blend of being able, or an expert who is able to blend both front end skills and back end skills. Again, I started off as a front end developer, and I accidentally fell into back end. I say accidental because, as I mentioned, I didn't go in knowing anything about CI/CD pipelines. So that's more deployment and automation of once you have everything built. We're talking about also managing, aside from actually building the UI, the user interface, which is what I guess we're really known for in the front end aspect. Talking about also managing databases, like we're talking about MySQL, MongoDB, etc. We're talking about Git version control. I know that a lot of that is also front end, maybe some back end. For me, it's primarily in Node.js, and working with specific APIs that are related with a server side. What else can I think of? Debugging, testing, all of these things. I think you would, for me at least, I think you would be surprised how much front end lends to back end, at least in the JavaScript world. And I think most importantly, I think it's a very fluid definition. You're often dealing with job marketers and professionals who, I mean, these job descriptions are not very clear on what they're looking for. I did a 3-month stint as a recruiter, by the way, in tech. So I can tell you most recruiters don't know what they're asking for. So what I'm trying to say is it's pretty fluid. And I think a lot of front-end skills lends to back-end skills, but you got to be open to it. But I'll stop there and let David get to it.
Awesome, thanks. Also, sorry, I'm not really sure what the order should be. Maybe it would be best if like you start first and I go after, just to, get that ordering down. But I guess in my own words, well, not really my own words. So I think there's like traditional sort of definitions of front end and back end development. So just going over those real quick, just in case folks aren't aware. So like I would define front end development as essentially developments to develop web applications on like a browser, typically, is the most traditional place to see it. Usually using technologies or languages like HTML, CSS, JavaScript, frameworks like React, Vue, that kind of stuff. And then on the backend side, you have, just people still in the web development space, but instead developing on the server side or anything that's essentially not the client side or in the browser. It gets a little bit more less defined once you go into the backend side usually, but these can be things like APIs or web services, microservices built on things like Node.js, Golang, Python, all these kind of stuff, and they're really things that sort of have the business logic and stuff that powers these applications on the server side or the backend. So a little bit differentiation between that and infra, which is more of like the dependencies and the sort of structure foundational stuff of web application development. But more importantly, I think full stack engineering isn't so much someone who can do both the front end and the back end, but it's someone who has the skills and capabilities to really develop features end to end. So understanding what they have to build on the front end, how that interacts with the back end, and sort of looking at that full sort of life cycle or sort of the problem from a bit of a higher perspective. That might mean that you don't go as deep into either parts of the stack. Hopefully, I think a lot of our goals is to become proficient at both ends and become expert in both. But I think for a lot of full stack developers, starting off, they really focused on those problems at a sort of high level view and who can contribute on both ends and understand that. So almost like a link between the two sides of the spectrum. So yeah, it's a really fun sort of place to be. You're really into intersection of a lot of things, and yeah, it's definitely a bit of a unique role in terms of web development, I'd say.
Yeah. So thank you so much for defining all of those, all the other aspects as well, and kind of going through, some of the skills that's required to be considered a full stack. Now let's go a little bit into kind of your journey then, like how you transition, how you gain the skills to become a full stack engineer. So what kind of strategies kind of worked for you? And I know, Chitra, you mentioned that you kind of fell into it accidentally, but I'm sure that transition process still entailed some kind of really hard work for you to kind of gain those skills. So what kind of strategies do you think worked for you when you're expanding your skill set from a front end developer to someone who can do full stack development?
Unfortunately, I'm not going to give the best answer because for me, it was a lot of just learning on the job. Because I'm part of a consultancy, it requires that I'm moving project to project, which means that depending on the project, we're looking at a different set of skills that are required to build whatever the customer requires, depending on their existing infrastructure, depending on what their business needs are. So at any given time, I could be working with a set of skills that I don't have already, but I have to learn on the job. So that means a lot of it is, YouTube watching. A lot of it is Udemy watching. A lot of it is going to the seniors on the team, the leads on the team, saying, how exactly do I make this work? Can you explain it to me in the dumbest way possible? But I'm always obviously looking at it from whatever I have knowledge of and seeing it from that frame of reference. So really, I don't have the best answer for this except for just learning on the job and using the existing resources that you already have.
Yep. I totally echo that statement. I think, self-studying and sort of, using resources where available is definitely a really key part of it. For me personally, so, like I mentioned, my back-end experience was building like personal tools for video games, which, really doesn't sound like much, but honestly, for me, it sort of showed me a different lens or different perspective of web development. So, with front-end development, I think especially, at least it was for me starting off, there wasn't a lot of sort of, complicated logical problems to solve. And it was more, how do I make this look a certain way? How do I make things behave a certain way in the browser? These kind of things, and like understanding like the flow of data and concepts like state. But in terms of like complex problems I need to break down, that didn't really exist as much as in backend. And for me, it was like, as I was building out these sort of internal video game tools, was questioning like, okay, I have this API. How do I turn this data into something I can use? And how am I able to query this data? How am I able to filter it, transform it? It's like I had this idea of the things that I have available and then the things that I want to use, what's actually valuable for me. And then with backend development, it was learning how to bridge those two things. What steps were needed? How can I, write down some kind of logic to get from point A to B? And, using that as the sort of frame of reference for, practicing more backend development and thinking of my own problems to solve and my own sort of portfolio application, stuff like that, that was really important because it allowed me to sort of challenge more, difficult problems or more interesting problems to solve than just simple like CRUD apps or something like that. So I would say, having that perspective of being a problem solver and creating problems to solve and trying to think of what steps go inside of that problem solving, I think, it's a little bit abstract, but honestly, I think it was probably the most impactful thing for me on top of, like Chitra said, like the Udemy courses and online resources and other kind of self-study.
I see. Yeah. So I guess on the note of what do you actually have to study? Like if I were to, for example, I'm a front end developer. I went to a front end boot camp. I actually don't know. I think the biggest thing that, I always talk about, like, I want to broaden my scope. I want to learn back end. I want to become a full stack developer. But it seems right now, because I work a front end job, the only way that I can learn those skills is outside of my job. Because currently the work that I do does not require me to do any back end. So it sometimes seems a little daunting because you're like, where do I even start? What YouTube course, like what Udemy course out of the hundreds of millions, which one do I buy? It's like, what is the right step of following the, I think there's sometimes like these, also there's so much abundance of information out there, but as somebody who is kind of coming from like a single someone who's specializing one domain, either front end or back end, like what should we do?
I guess I'll answer that first. First of all, I echo all of those feelings. I've gone through every single one of those feelings and still do it to some extent. I think, first of all, I love Davidson's answer that, he has an abstract way of going about it. I'll be honest, I wish I had that, but as someone who came in blindly to this career where I had no expectations of this career. I had no knowledge of this career. I didn't know what software engineers did. I didn't know what front-end developers did. So the idea of, what are the skills that I need to pick up, like you said, I still, to some extent, struggle with those questions. But what I have found is I have relied heavily on my work experience by basically volunteering to be on product calls. So when my team leads are having sales calls, for example, or development calls, or if there's anything else going on, even just anything within the greater structure of the company, I try to volunteer to just be present, because what I want to see is what exactly is the client looking for. Let me just clarify. I'm not in this career for passion. I'm in it because I found it to be fulfilling in some ways, specifically from a monetary perspective. So for me, when I'm listening to clients describe, these are the problems I want to solve, I want to understand, how do we get from A to B, or like you said, A to Z. And I don't know what steps are along the way. So what I'm trying to say is I need to be able to see that journey happen. And that has happened successively in the last 4 years in my work. Okay, you want this developed, we developed it this way. Now we have to think about the CI/CD pipeline. We have to think about, how do we manage the servers? Okay, now we have a release pipeline coming up, and we have a release date coming up. It's just the entire watching that entire thing happen is something I needed to understand before I could ask the questions. I didn't know what kind of tools were needed until I saw them being used in the actual, day-to-day experience. So that's my answer to that.
Yep. And I personally echo a lot of what you say as well. Like, understanding the problem space and getting exposure to people on like the business side, or who are the consumers of a product, or are like on the product side of the discussion to, understand, I think is critical, because, as a backend developer or front-end developer, you're really just delivering value at the end of the day, and what you build is determined by those factors. But going a little bit less abstract and very specific in terms of technologies and these kind of things, I would say that for me, one of the most important things in hindsight that I wish I did in the past was, not chase any particular tech stack or any particular language as flavor of the month, or, is, good for the market at the beginning. Doing that later is definitely a good career move, but at the beginning, it's minimizing barrier to learning the thought process and the patterns necessary in order to succeed as a backend developer, as a skill set. So what I mean by that is, I highly recommend most folks I think here would have like the HTML, CSS, JavaScript stack in some kind of flavor. So with those experience, JavaScript, Node.js exists as a server-side backend language, and being able to jump into it using your existing JavaScript knowledge, I think is really, really valuable, because you don't have to spend a lot of time learning the new syntax, the new gotchas of like new programming languages, like Python especially is a popular one, and that thing is, there's a lot of things that just get you that don't really make sense in JavaScript. So instead of having to deal with that, you can focus on like, I know language, just learn a couple new frameworks. I can focus on, understanding the patterns and the thought process becomes, or what'll make me a good backend developer. And from there, it's getting inspiration from online resources. There are tons of resources out there on like good full stack projects. If possible, look at like, production level code bases if you have that kind of mentorship resources, or kind of open source frameworks to look at how they do things in the backend side. Anywhere you can get your eyes on sort of, professional, I guess, or production level code would help a long way. And I see a question in chat from, I'm sorry for not mispronouncing the name, but Cicero, I'm sorry, but leveraging tools like, AI, ChatGPT, to, help you along that journey of writing some code for you, not with the intent of it doing your job for you to write everything, but to give you a base of what to understand. So like, a frame of reference to like parse yourself and understand yourself to be able to write on your own. So yeah, lots of tools exist. Highly recommend staying within the same language space that you're in, and not spreading yourself too thin by worrying too much about language and frameworks and that kind of thing.
Just want to say, Chris, that's exactly what ended up happening with me, Davidson. Like, I found myself overwhelmed because I had just learned JavaScript for the front end, and the idea of learning Python or all these other languages. Another push was for .NET. It just did not sit well for me, and it became a procrastination habit for me that I didn't want to learn it. It was just too much for my brain. And being able to just use Node.js where I already knew the syntax, or at least close enough, was great. Okay, Weston.
Yeah, that's that. I actually like, I resonate with that so much. I think one of the first things that I thought I had to do was, especially because at my company, our backend is written in Go and lots of Python. So I signed up to like an introduction to Python course. I started it, and then I don't know. I probably did like 5 minutes, 10 minutes of the course, and like I never went back. It's just like I just don't want to do it. Yeah, but that's a really good point. Okay, let's move on to let's talk about kind of challenges. So, can you share maybe, and it doesn't have to necessarily be a challenge through your transition, but any sort of challenges as a full stack engineer, period, or any sort of challenges that you faced when trying to kind of learn the full stack, and if there was any sort of like insight or resources that kind of helped you kind of overcome it.
Maybe I'll go first this time. All right, cool. So I think for me, the biggest challenge was understanding that in a lot of companies, especially with larger teams, especially if this is when I joined Ada, having a full stack skill set, a lot of times you're required to, like I mentioned earlier, be this sort of bridge between front end folks and back end folks. and sort of look at things from a higher perspective, which could translate to you doing a lot more planning work, project planning, project lead work, just because you're looking at things from a different lens. So one of my biggest challenges was, I think, for some context, I was doing my freelance work for like a couple of years, a year and a half. Joined a very small startup as just like a full stack developer, but it was really just anything I can get my hands on because they were really tiny. And then, 6 or 7 months after that, I joined Ada. And I really just bit off more than I can chew. It's a miracle I got that job in the first place, but it sucked at the beginning. And then, around 6 months in, I was asked to be a project lead for one of my projects. And the reason why was because I had, very high level knowledge of front and back end. Was not considered to be like a subject matter expert by any means on either side, but I was thrust into that role because of my full stack capacity. So the challenge there was all of a sudden I had to communicate in very specific terms with front end folks and back end folks, define this problem on both sides, and sort of plan things in terms of what has to get done when, what are the dependencies, who's involved. It gets pretty crazy. So for me, that was both a challenge and a learning experience because I realized that I was thinking of full stack the wrong way. Up until then, I was both a front end and back end developer, sort of 50% on both, not really great at either, but I can be useful. And all of a sudden, I'm no longer just both the front end and back end. I'm someone a little bit different than that. Like I really have to be someone who can communicate on both sides and understand those problem spaces and how to communicate with folks. So especially with product people, like understanding, how to translate product requirements to both front end and back end requirements. That's a big thing too. So for me, it was, again, mentorship was huge. I was lucky enough to be surrounded by really, really smart people, like way smarter than me. And I still am in touch with them and they still help me a lot with these kind of things. But, at the end of the day, it's trial and error. I think that project didn't really go the greatest. But at the same time, it's something that you get used to and something that you really need. And I can't stress it enough, like having to have that mental shift to really understand, and getting a head start on it, I think is really important and will serve you really well in terms of both ramping up on the front and back end and also being more valuable in the teams that you join.
I don't have as great of an answer. But it's funny that Davidson mentioned that, having to understand what it means to be a lead in a project like that. I was in a similar position where a promotion was hanging upon my ability to understand both to oversee a project to its fulfillment. And that continues to be a challenge, actually. It's not something that I have overcome just yet, but it continues to be a challenge and I'm still working on it. But what has helped has been understanding agile methodologies, understanding, business perspectives, and talking to business people, because I think they have a very specific language that they're looking for. And being able to speak that language is very important. So I'll keep my answer short there.
Okay, thank you so much. So I think this question kind of is somewhat similar to some of the points that both of you mentioned, but you mentioned that full stack is this, it goes beyond just, being one or the other. It is like a whole experience. So how do you kind of foster that kind of seamless integration between the front to the back? Are there kind of specific tools or any sort of practices that you swear by? Things like that.
Yep. Great question. I think this is a bit of more of like a technical answer, I'd say. And for me, as a full stack developer, a lot of the work that I do is building out endpoints and also the corresponding sort of, front end views or something that will consume those endpoints on the front end. So what that means to me is understanding sort of API design and API development specifically. And I think the most important part there would be sort of like contracts, API contracts. So what I mean by that is, every endpoint, has, a sort of schema associated with or a spec. If you've heard of like OpenAPI or like a Swagger documentation, these are, common tools used for it. But, those endpoints were designed, by somebody to accept certain, parameters, to accept certain request bodies, do certain validations, authorization, and that kind of stuff. And how those get designed really shape how they get consumed by clients, which, a lot of times include the front end. So, for me, it was understanding, API design at least a high level, understanding what makes a good endpoint, what's a bad endpoint, understanding things like authorization, validation that sort of plays a part into these things, and what is not just comfortable but also like effective for the front end to be able to like communicate with the back end. And then on top of that, system design plays a really big part in system architecture. So this is like more of like a high level concept, but understanding things like WebSocket technologies and things other than HTTP requests, where front ends can sort of communicate with the back end. That also matters a lot because specifically at Ada, I work a lot with chat clients. And HTTP requests, while you can do something like a polling loop, which is continuous HTTP calls, for a more event-based system like chat, you typically see things like WebSockets appear a lot more often. And understanding these kind of tools or technologies and architectures, they don't just, it's not just a purely backend thing. They really shape how clients interact with different parts of the system. So would highly recommend taking, again, it's very high level, right? Like API contracts and system design, right? It seems like a bit out of scope, but really, it's a bit backwards, whereas a full stack developer, a lot of times having that higher level understanding will help you a lot in doing your day-to-day. So yeah, that's sort of things that I would recommend. Yeah.
For me, I think so. For me, the exposure to all of the things that Davidson just mentioned came through AWS, which actually serves as the underlying technology for. It's funny enough, we also build chatbots and things like that. But so AWS was again this thing that I had no idea about, but through that I was able to understand things like scalability, because again we have enterprise level clients where we're not just building these web applications that are going to be used by a couple people, but it's all about scalability. It's about flexibility, being able to manage those servers efficiently, and keeping the cost in mind. And so a lot of these technologies, like you're thinking about how do I efficiently manage the infrastructure? How do I automate, for example, provisioning resources? All these things, you kind of have to have an architectural perspective to it. And it was something that I was lacking. And it took, again, learning about AWS, going through at least the bare minimum that they have. I believe it's just an AWS cloud certification at the introductory level. I highly urge that, because it was kind of an aha moment having taken that, oh, okay, so this is what happens on the back end. And that was kind of my gateway into understanding more back end technologies. And even what I was doing with Node and actually building out the servers, I think that AWS helped serve my understanding of that. So yeah.
That's awesome. And just to kind of reiterate, that was that was a course, like an AWS course?
So AWS has a number of certifications. AWS has a lot of services that you can use. These are services that you can have that AWS specifically provides, but you can obviously get them from other providers as well. But they provide things like you can automate building. Like I said, I keep saying CI/CD, but CI/CDs they can actually create your web application for you. You can upload your HTML, your JavaScript, your CSS directly onto it, and it creates a domain for you. Oh my gosh, there's like 200 plus services that it provides, and it creates the servers for you. You manage the servers. You don't have to manage the servers. You can manage the servers. Too many answers there, but what I'm trying to say is definitely look at cloud technologies. For me, it served as I said, an explanation of what the backend can achieve at scale.
I see. Yeah. Okay, thank you so much for clarifying. That's awesome. Cool. Okay, let's talk a little bit about I think earlier on, I think Davidson was talking about solving, problem solving and that kind of stuff. And I guess this is, I can't really imagine Yeah, I don't have anything in mind when I ask this question, but did you ever have an instance where being a full stack developer was kind of a significant advantage where your expertise positioned you to kind of solve problems and just become a better problem solver?
Yep. Okay. I think for me, there is a very important or a big example in my career where I think this was the most useful. So, I don't want to get too into the technical details for this particular project, but it was a project which, again, I was, fortunately or unfortunately stuck into the project lead position, where it was essentially a system where, we're a chatbot company. Sometimes a chatbot can't answer a chatter's question. You get transitioned to an actual person, a live agent. So we were developing a live agent solution with a new sort of live agent integration. If any of you folks have heard of a company called Zendesk, it's with a Zendesk messaging is the name of their live agent platform. So we were developing a Zendesk messaging live agent integration at Ada. I was leading that, and that was a crazy kind of situation. So lots of technical blockers on the business side. Zendesk wouldn't let us do certain things. Ada wanted to do certain things, vice versa. And ultimately, part of the integration lived as like a front end side-loaded SDK. So an SDK, JavaScript SDK loaded on the front end to handle certain events. Other stuff was happening on the back end via webhooks, if you've heard of it, or like sort of event-driven HTTP requests hitting our server. And that understanding how events flowed from this front-end SDK, from chatter-initiated stuff, agent-initiated stuff, hitting webhooks, going through the socket, WebSocket, all these kinds of things, like it was a lot to sort of take in at once. And, for me, being thrust in this project, I had no idea that would have been the case. But thankfully, because I was in a full stack role, I knew about things like how our front end was designed, how our state management worked in terms of conversation states, and understanding how the state of our chatbot is in certain parts of the conversation, and WebSocket technologies at a high level, webhooks at a high level. I've worked with all of these. So having a high level understanding of everything allowed me to put the pieces together to form a solution, which ultimately didn't end up surviving, thankfully, because the business sort of eased up on both ends and we were able to have a more robust solution. But we got to a working state regardless because of that knowledge. And I think if I didn't have that sort of higher level overview of things as a full stack engineer, I would have gotten pretty stuck, and it could have been pretty disastrous for maybe not the project, probably someone smarter than me would have taken over, but for my career and for my learning opportunities, it would have been a big impact. So that would be, I think, where my biggest advantage was in my career thus far. Opened up a lot of doors for me.
For me, I can't necessarily say that it has been an advantage, but what I can say is that over the last 4 years, excuse me, over the last 4 years, the more I learn about the backend, or the more I continue to, there was one tilting point at one point in time where the backend just started making more sense to me. And I realized that it translated to me being able to be present when speaking to, again, the business, speaking to our clients. And I think being able to engage in conversations with teams that are responsible for security, authorization, for example, like you said, being able to speak to that, or how, for example, we're going to be creating certain kinds of APIs and how we need to add certain kinds of signatures to it. Being able to speak to that with the team responsible for security, which is often a separate team that handles that. That was kind of like, a self-fulfilling moment, because I finally felt like, okay, I'm not an imposter in this space. And I think it has happened numerous times where, so I can't necessarily say that it's an advantage per se, but it has helped me build my confidence. So I suppose it's an advantage for myself. Yeah.
That's awesome. So to kind of go off of the thought of, how it kind of served you technically, like at your current job, do you find that being a full stack engineer and embracing kind of this transition, has it really kind of helped your career trajectory overall? And do you think that, you know, embracing full stack as somebody who has more of a single domain knowledge, is that truly an advantage from like a career point of view?
Yep, I would say so. I would say for me, there are resources online to sort of support the data, but in general, full stack engineers are compensated a little bit more than people who are focused on one part of the stack. And I think really the reason why, and this is sort of echoing in my career, is because as a full stack engineer, because you understand the technical details of the front and the back end, you're in the best possible position to speak with product and to understand product requirements and translate those, like I mentioned, to both front end and back end requirements. And what that means is, you're the person who's translating business goals into actionable tasks to deliver those, that business value. And a lot of times your name gets attributed to it. Like I mentioned with this project, as a project lead, after completing that, relatively successfully, that opened the door to me to getting a promotion internally. Not because I was the smartest person in the room, very far from it. I'm still not. I'm sure there are actually a lot of, junior intermediate folks who are better than me or smarter than me in certain technical aspects, but because you're in that position to deliver value, your name gets attributed to things, and you're doing really valuable work for the business that isn't necessarily the most technically hasn't most technical depth. At the end of the day, you make the business a lot of money being a full stack developer, sometimes in ways that a front end or back end developer just wouldn't have the opportunity to. And as a career path, that both, it asks a little bit of a different set of skills, I think, as a full stack developer, but it also opens a lot of doors which might take a lot longer or maybe would be more difficult to have opened if you were focused on one part of the stack. So served me well in my career, and it's definitely something that I'll be continuing going forward.
To put it succinctly, you have more job opportunities, you have more job descriptions you can look at and feel that you can apply for them. That's really it.
Yeah, that's true. That's awesome. I think that in itself is more than enough for us to all, start learning back end. So I am mindful of time. I do want to save some time for questions. I know I skipped over a bunch of questions that I sent you. So why don't we keep it to, I'll give you a choice. We can end before we go to the Q&A. Do you have maybe one piece of advice you'd like to give to an aspiring full stack developer? Or is there, you can feel free to talk about one of the questions that I missed that I sent you previously, if there's something you want to passionately tell us about before we move on to the Q&A.
Go ahead, David.
Gotcha. Let's see. I would say I'll go with the first one in terms of one critical piece of advice for anyone, pursuing full stack. I actually think this goes to people just considering themselves a software developer engineer in general. One thing that really changed my viewpoint was, at my current role, my title is senior full stack engineer, but really, I think I'm the only person with that title because it's sort of like a legacy title. Most people are just engineer. And the reason why is because there's no longer differentiation between the front end and back end. And it was a pretty interesting shift because the way that they put it is, as a developer, you're just a problem solver. So you're not someone who's building out views or building out endpoints or doing some back end front end stuff. You're solving problems using code to deliver business value, and that's it. So front end, back end are just different flavors of that. But whether you're pursuing front end, because ultimately, unless you're going to be doing web design or very display presentation oriented sort of problems, and a lot of SaaS companies, you'll be solving a lot of business problems on the front end, like state management and complex like user flows with like payments, that kind of stuff. All those are problems that you have to solve. And on the back end, similar deal. You have data coming in that you want to serve to the front end. You have integrations that you're working with. They're all problems. And the more that you differentiate between front and back end, the more you don't open your mind up into being able to have transferable patterns and ways of thinking to solve just problems in general. So biggest piece of advice I can give, treat your work as a developer as a problem solver, and really think about the logical steps you took to solve a problem, not the frameworks or the language or the methods that you're using, just the actual problem solving capabilities. I think that'll serve you, well, at least it served me really, really well in my career, and I seen it succeed for other people. So that'll be the biggest piece of advice I can give.
I love that answer. I just want to say the idea of switching your mindset from thinking about technologies, like what technologies do I need to learn, to thinking about what are the problems that I need to solve, I think it's critical. And I'm so glad you said that. And I think the other thing I'd like to add is don't gatekeep yourself. Don't decide, okay, I can't do this because I don't have this and this and this. There's nothing stopping you. I saw the question earlier about how much ChatGPT do we use it. I mean, it's just yet another tool that will help you learn. I found that I have learned to ask the right questions, or I have learned to start asking various kinds of questions to get to what I'm looking for. And it's a way for you to kind of help parse your own thoughts. In my opinion, I think it has helped me find solutions faster. It has helped me learn something faster. It has helped me understand the questions that I should be asking as well. So those are two tools I would recommend. Being kind to yourself and don't gatekeep, and don't gatekeep the types of tools you use. That's all.
Amazing. Yeah, that's actually very inspiring. I feel like for me, I've definitely kind of defined myself by my stack sometimes. So this is definitely a completely different way of thinking moving forward. So thank you so much for that. So yeah, let's move on to our Q&A period. I think I'm just gonna scroll up. We had a bunch of questions before, I think, right? Oh, actually, our lovely admins have already collected the questions for me in advance. So, any, okay, so that question has been answered. Let's do okay, let's just go with Weston's question first. As ultimately meaningless as it is, what is your preferred web stack in terms of full stack development? MERN, mean, son of deal. And has there been any frameworks, libraries that you fell in love with along the course of your time developing?
Sorry, I needed a second to think.
I know.
Did you want to go first, or?
Go ahead. No, sorry.
Cool. Okay. So for me, I would say that my preferred web stack was actually the what would it be? MERN, I guess. The sole reason being that so the tech stacks I have experience with are Python, Flask on the back end, and Node on the back end, and then React and Vue on the front end. So for me, back-end development, Node was a lot, I guess, not easier, but it was a lot better for asynchronous type of programming. So for those who are unaware, Python has a couple of interesting caveats. The first is that nothing is async by default. So if you make an HTTP request, it's sync, it awaits it, for lack of a better term. And the second is it doesn't have true multi-threading. So a bit of a side into Python, but there's something called the Python GIL, which, sorry, maybe a bit too in the weeds, but essentially multi-threading in Python exists as essentially concurrency. So it's not really parallel happening at the same time. It's, as one thing is blocked, it's doing the other thing in rapid sequence to make it look like it's happening at the same time. These things break when you have hundreds to thousands of concurrent HTTP requests, which we had that issue in my company, and things just start booming left, right, and center. And we would not have had that problem with Node because it does support true multi-threading and parallelism, that kind of stuff. So a bit hyper technical for my scenario, but at the same time, it is like, I think that Node and JavaScript in general does teach you some patterns of asynchronous programming. which can be applied to other languages a lot. And, it's sort of like a core, foundational piece of it, which, for me, served me really well in terms of understanding async in general and all these kind of things. So, yeah, I would say MERN was probably the most influential in my career.
Same, but not for the comparison reasons. I took what I was taught and ran with it. I found myself not thinking too hard about the technical aspect of it. I was taught React and JavaScript at boot camp, and it just made sense. And I didn't want to think too hard about what else I need to learn. Angular, with all its complexities and too much typing, I think I don't need to learn it right now. And I think it has served its purpose for me. So, yeah.
Nice. This is a question from before. Is it possible one could be a full stack dev and not know it? I don't know. I'm not sure if that was a serious question or not, but I thought it was funny. Thank you, Jermaine, for that question.
In all seriousness, there is an answer to that.
Yeah.
You could. Especially, side note, I know a lot of front-end devs who build out like serverless stuff, and they don't know that serverless is technically in the back-end categories of stuff like Lambda functions or, what was it? Cloud functions, I think, in Google was what it was called. But yeah, if you're doing that, you're probably full stack. So a bit of a more serious answer, but probably not a serious question.
I agree. I didn't go into learning AWS, thinking, oh, this is what I want to learn about backend. Like I said, it was just falling into AWS and learning about those serverless functions and learning about infrastructure as code. That one day I literally went, do I know the backend now? Maybe I do. So yeah, just I think it's pretty seamless in my opinion.
Yes. Apologies, Jeremy. Yes, it was a very serious question. My bad. Thank you so much. There was a question about, do you use Copilot in your IDE?
I have. I felt it was most useful for folks who are aware of like certain software design patterns like factories and adapters and that kind of stuff. I felt it very useful to say like, create an adapter pattern for this thing and just give me a base to work off of, just like boilerplate essentially. But in terms of actually solving or writing the code that I needed to, lots of times it requires sort of like, business domain knowledge of exactly understanding what the business logic is supposed to be and breaking it down in my head. I found that trying to explain it correctly to Copilot, it was just faster for me to write it myself a lot of the time. So other than these boilerplate use cases, I haven't really found it too useful. But it is great for documenting though, stuff like summarizing stuff and documenting. So highly recommend for that.
No, I have not used it. Sorry.
Okay, so there is a question about why are there no mentions of Java and Spring Boot as backend?
Great question. I think the reason that I personally didn't mention it is because, Java and Spring Boot. So this is a highly simplified answer, and people might get mad if you're, passionate about the space, but I feel like, Java is an example of what we call a compiled language, meaning that, the entire, backend servers or code base gets compiled into a single sort of bundle, and then you execute that. And that usually means that it's more performant in certain use cases. And when you're thinking about scale, a language like Java and like frameworks like Spring Boot, do help, your app to be more performant in certain cases. However, the reason why I personally didn't mention it as something that I would recommend is because even though it's used a lot by enterprise organizations and there is definitely a space and value for it, ultimately it's another language that you have to learn because there's no front-end Java frameworks. Unless you're in mobile dev and you're using something like Kotlin, for example. And so the overhead of learning Java, A, you're learning a new language, and B, everything is object-oriented in Java. There's no option. So if you're not familiar with object-oriented programming and solid principles, that kind of stuff, it's extremely easy for you to just get lost in it and to just write some monstrosity, which is, ultimately not your fault. That's how the language was designed. And the amount of investment to learn on your own how to become a Java dev is so much. I feel like there's a lot more mileage to be gained learning a language like JavaScript or maybe Python or Golang, which has a bit more flexibility in terms of how you write things. You can focus on getting things done instead of figuring out how to do it in this particular language or framework. So that would be my reason why I didn't recommend it. But it is a great language, and no hate towards it at all.
I don't have an answer to that.
Okay, sounds good. I think one last question. Any advice from someone coming from a mobile development background?
I think, Davidson, you should take this because I have not interacted with many mobile developers.
I would say, so as a mobile dev, I'm assuming as a mobile dev, you're mostly on like, similar to like a front end side, and meaning that you're developing things that are, interacted with on your mobile device, like a phone, like an app development, that kind of thing. So in that case, I would say everything that we mentioned applies. The only difference is instead of developing for the browser, you're developing for a mobile device. The patterns remain the same. There are, small caveats like, notification systems and other mobile specific things, or things that are not present in mobile devices, which you have to account for. But those are just technical details. At the end of the day, you're developing a client for a server. And, it's important to think of those terms really in their, like, I think, literal meanings, like client being like a customer, server being something that serves something. So if you think about it from that pattern, different flavor of client, but it's still a client, same way a browser is, or any other sort of other, CLI tool even, or anything that just consumes the server stuff. So yeah, my biggest advice would be, if there aren't a lot of resources for it, which, I would imagine they're not as much as web development, even study web development courses, but just take the front end aspect and just translate it to your mobile space. Everything on the back end and how it connects should apply for the most part, unless you're doing some highly specialized stuff, at which point, I think you've gone a little bit further. So yeah, that would be my advice for mobile devs.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. We're going to close the Q&A floor because the time is 9 o'clock. So thank you so much for being a wonderful audience tonight and joining our conversation. Thank you especially to our panelists, Chitra and Davidson, for your invaluable wisdom and insight tonight. And Sammy's going to plug in our Tech Tank Slack invite and the LinkedIn sheet if you haven't shared that yet. And before you go for the night, we are a 100% volunteer-run organization. So if you've received value from our events, like the one today, if you've attended our in-person meetups, we would highly appreciate your support in paying it forward to help keep us going. So any sort of amount that you donate goes entirely to paying for our event operations and common community infrastructure for our members. So Sammy's going to plug in that link for you right now. And please follow us to receive alerts for future events for both in-person and virtual. So we do have a meetup page, a LinkedIn page, and a website that Sammy is going to be posting shortly, which he's not, so I will do it. This one is for our donations, and these are the alerts that you can receive. Weston, our next in-person meetup is on Thursday, November 30th. It's happening at Rakuten Kobo. It's at 150 John Street, so come join us. It's going to be a fun conversation. We're talking about Eric Langel from Genesis. He is going to talk about app telemetry, so come check us out. Yeah, and that is a wrap for tonight. Thank you so much. This was wonderful. I can't wait to continue conversing with you two beyond this. Thank you so much for tonight, and thank you everybody for joining us. We're going to end it here. Good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.